So it's really clear that public art is part of the transformation of Times Square. And here to explain how public art activates public spaces is Nicholas Baum. Nicholas is the new-ish, I guess we can't say you're new anymore, the new director and chief curator of the Public Art Fund. He's held curatorial positions at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, at the Wadsworth Atheneum, and at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. So, tell us why it works.
Well, you know, I expect that some of the people who told Tim that they wanted the porn back were artists. Because artists are troublemakers, rebels, nonconformists, and generally want to open our eyes to things that we have them closed to or that we're ignoring or that we'd rather not see. So, of course, I think I probably don't have to convince anyone in this room that artists play a key role in the vitality of neighborhoods of the city. But we also have to, I think, balance the fact that what artists are going to do will push buttons, will, you know, be challenging, and if it wasn't, we'd simply be, you know, in suburbia in a very dull kind of situation, and that's why we all love New York. It's why I'm incredibly excited to have escaped the museum world and be on the streets, connected to an organization with also a great history with MAS and a personal history with Vince Apollo as well. He used to be head of the board of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, where I used to work. So a lot of interesting resonances. Also, I think the conversation thus far has, and probably a lot of the conversation has been about how we use spaces, how audiences use spaces, the kind of divide that's the question perhaps in the public art arena might be, well, are you creating works of art for the art audience or for the general audience? And that tension can also be something that has to be resolved. But to kind of start with the artist, I think is important in thinking about public art. The whole emergence from the 70s to now of organizations like Public Art Fund, Creative Time, they actually mirror changes in how artists make their work. It's really the shift from studio practice to more conceptually based modes of practice. An artist would not make the waterfalls in their studio or the gates or, you know, any of the major public art projects. And it's really, in a sense, by watching artists and looking at how they work and the way they change that I think we can make sure that our engagement with public art doesn't become pedestrian, if you'll forgive that term. So my own, coming back to this idea of artists being troublemakers, I actually was meeting with a fabulous artist yesterday. It was in Germany. I got back last night. And typically, we were having a great conversation, and I'm very excited about his work. And you know, I was like, really, I think it'd be tremendous to mount an exhibition of your work in New York City. And he sort of like took a deep breath and was like, well, but how can I feel good about doing something like that at this moment in time, to have all of the resources and lavishness of sort of an exhibition when the economy and so many people are suffering, and there's you know, how can I really sort of feel good about that? And of course, I said to him that, first of all, there's nothing more democratic as a venue to show your work than the streets of New York City. When you think of the diversity the sheer numbers, the size of the audience that we're able to reach, that we're able to introduce to contemporary art in that context, it really is an extraordinary opportunity. And I think artists primarily want their work to be seen. They want to connect with audiences. And New York has perhaps, more than any other place in the world, an extraordinary attraction for artists. What other city has Times Square? You know, artists would, I think, have always loved Times Square as a public space because as makers of images, you know, what image could be more extraordinary, have more vitality than that sort of incredible energy? So I think for us, thinking about how to present public art, we've got to think about continually reinventing the model, responding to how artists are working. So let me run, I somehow was in the middle of the PowerPoint. I must have been sort of hot buttoned. Let me show you a couple of projects that we've done over the last year or so that I've been involved. Kate Gilmore took on the challenge of working in Bryant Park. And I think like most public spaces in New York, it's already very rich, very layered, very beautiful, and very active. But I think this shows how even an intervention with a contemporary artist, this was a 5-day project, brought incredible vitality and interest to this location. So you see there in the plaza next to the fountain, a piece called Walk the Walk, where Kate had a group of women stomping around all day long on top of a yellow cube that you could walk into. And of course, the piece very much connected to its site, to the idea of working 9 to 5, of the idea of women in the labor force, of the pedestrian intensity of the city streets. And you know, it was really wonderful to see people respond to this. And of course, one of the comments you get is only in New York. And I think we want to keep engaging contemporary art to allow us to see spaces that have become familiar in new ways, even if they're places we love. So that, you know, Bryant Park, for that 5 days, has this incredible energy and vitality. Another exhibition that we, in a venue that we program regularly, and I guess I think a key point to make is public art can bring incredible vitality because it can work in locations that are unexpected. You know, an artist can see something and want to work in a way that none of us have thought about. There are other sites that we work with on a regular basis, like City Hall Park. Here you see a rather wintry scene of the park, but right now it's filled with sculptures, a show called Statuesque that actually looks at the idea of the statue, perhaps that conventional idea of public art in its most probably conventional and traditional form, and asks the question of how artists are dealing with that idea of the statue today. And I think, you know, one of the things we need to remember is there is, just as with Jane Jacobs, there's no value attached inherently to something being large or small. Similarly, in art, nothing's inherently more progressive or more conservative. And it may be that, you know, doing bronzes after a century of running as far away from bronzes on pedestals as we can is actually once again a radical gesture. So it's this dialogue that artists lead that I think allows us to sort of continue to reinvent the way we can present their work and engage public spaces. The response of people to art in public is something that's also incredibly unique and that I've noticed over the last year is extraordinarily enriching for artists. They don't see people respond to their work that way in museums and galleries. For a last example, let me show you this current project, Ryan Gander, a young British artist. He is making, with this project, his first public art piece, first major commission in the United States. Also this idea of New York being a very global city, and I think contemporary art being able to connect us to what artists are doing all over the world. You see again a sort of rather empty scene at Doris Friedman Plaza, the sort of southeastern entrance to Central Park. And a project, The Happy Prince, some of you may know, is a short story by Oscar Wilde. And Ryan was inspired by that. It's a story of a statue, a beautiful civic statue covered in gold that gets destroyed. And so Ryan's sculpture is actually a sculpture of the ruined statue. It looks like stone, but it's actually molded in one enormous piece. So it plays on many different levels. But something that Ryan said to me, this of course is wonderful because it's become a site for those street performers. You see one sitting here who's themselves sort of covered in gold, so the return of the golden figure to this monument, or kind of monument in quotation marks, was wonderful. Ryan said, this is so much more rewarding than working in museums or galleries. To be able to see people of all ages, of all types, of all walks of life, engage spontaneously, directly, enthusiastically, or with a critique. But to have that immediacy for an artist, I think, cuts through those filters that we see, within museums and galleries, which are our voluntary places to look at art. Here, leveraging New York City, it's itself a work of art, and taking that extraordinary asset and multiplying it by allowing artists to engage with it, to respond to it, and to push their own practice, I think is an extraordinary opportunity.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to comment much on how your German artist can feel good about a show in the current economy, except to say maybe he could underwrite the next MAS Summit, because this is really about the future of New York. But I do want to say I walk by City Hall Park almost every day, and one of the most ingenious things about Statuesque is the way that the show starts outside of the park. The bronze that's outside of the park on Broadway, I think, makes people who feel they know the park very well think about it in a whole different way. And our next panelist, Sam Miller, who is the very new president of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, is going to talk a little bit more about that, in the sense he's going to talk about how art creates a sense of place in communities. Let me just tell you a little bit about Sam. He is the past president of Leveraging Investments in Creativity, which developed efforts to increase direct support for artists. He was the executive director of the New England Foundation for the Arts and the president and executive director of the Jacobs Pillow Dance Festival. And he is our partner in the River to River Festival in Lower Manhattan. Sam.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Vin. Both of you have been so welcoming to me in my entry into the city. This slide is so that I remember my name and what organization I work for. The Lower Manhattan Cultural Council was founded in 1973, and we make grants to artists in Manhattan. We provide professional development services to artists in all 5 boroughs, and we are most known for residency programs using space around Lower Manhattan to offer artists work space, and then for public programs, including our partnership with the Alliance on River to River. Liz asked, when I first heard the question, had to do with the notion of permanence and what artists contributed to the permanent development of communities. And what LMCC is really about is about sort of the connection between the fact that artists have a permanent need for temporary space, and that developers and landowners and landlords have a permanent need for temporary use of this space. So this is a project. These are some vaults at 14 Wall Street, and we converted them into temporary studios. Most of the space we have at Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, we have month to month, year to year. We don't own any space other than our own office. So we first make it useful, and then we make sure it's used. This is another vault and another performance in that vault. This is obviously an outdoor space, and then the utilization of that space. And finally, this is the Lent space. This is a vacant lot just north of Canal that we have both installations and events taking place on that space. I think that this temporary animation of space is in itself a long-term strategy to encourage vibrancy. But we hope going forward, as Lower Manhattan is a zone of development and of imagining a new New York, that we can create a laboratory where artists can not just create mediation, short-term events, but really have influence on how are these spaces developed and used in the long term. And so it's our hope that we can create sort of a laboratory that brings together artists and architects and engineers and others to really think about how these spaces should be used now and forever. And that means that our project should not just be about the events themselves, but about seating, circulation, lighting, sound, and the other sort of technologies that enable public activity. And also that our project should really increase people's knowledge about the site, what's its history and what its future opportunity, and how can citizens who either live, work, or visit these sites have a role in their future development. And so we think we play that catalytic role in both the short-term animation and the long-term development of these sites. And one of the things is, thinking of Jane Jacobs, is Lower Manhattan is really marked by these sort of border zones that are sometimes hard to cross. So for instance, land space, Canal Street is almost a moat between one part of Manhattan and another. And how can you really create activity across these kinds of border zones? And also, how can we create sort of new paths of desire so that people don't just move north and south, but east and west in Lower Manhattan, so that the businesses in the middle of our neighborhood are patronized by people who are attracted by the art and not just on the edges. So we're really fortunate to be working in Lower Manhattan at a time when big decisions are being made about the East River waterfront, about Water Street, about South Greenwich, about Broad Wall, about this Hudson Square and the Canal Street. And so again, we hope to have a role not just in the temporary animation of these spaces and in providing artists with the space they need to make their and share their work, but in the long-term understanding of what the best possible social and cultural use of these kinds of spaces and the zones between them can be. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I don't know if it's the overarching metaphor of Wall Street in Lower Manhattan and the idea that time is money, but in Lower Manhattan, we really watch the clock. So, thank you. Our last panelist is Marcy Reven. She is the managing director of City Lore and co-founded and heads Place Matters, which is City Lore's joint project with MAS to promote and protect significant places throughout the city. And so I guess we began our panel presentations with the idea of authenticity, and we're going to end with the discussion of authenticity. So Marcy, if you could tell us, what is the Place Matters project and why does it matter?
Okay, we'll be happy to. So again, thank you for being here. It's really a great opportunity. Well, I have the luck of partnering with municipal art societies. So we work together all the time. In the late 1990s, City Lore, my organization, we're a cultural organization, and the Municipal Art Society got together to promote a project called Place Matters. And the idea is we wanted to bring attention to places of historic and cultural significance around the city. So we came to think about these places as ones that connected us to the past, that hosted ongoing community and cultural traditions, and that kept the city distinctive. So Over time, we've worked with individuals and communities. We've been around for about 10 years. We've been working with a number of people throughout the city on a variety of projects that, in general, promote well-being through the promotion of these spaces. These projects have included public programs, historic sign projects, books, films, protection campaigns. We've done a number of things over time, all around the purpose of working against the very human tendency to overlook the importance of space. It's kind of an amazing thing, given that all of us here know how important it is, but it tends to be a rather forgotten groundwork of American cultural and society. One geographer suggested, Yi-Fu Tuan, that place is immediately lived, but not deliberately known. So it's the kind of thing that people have a hard time articulating. So that's one purpose, to bring that general attention to place. Another purpose is to figure out what are the specific places in New York City that actually make a difference. So to that end, one of the things we've done consistently is to solicit nominations from the public for places that they care about. The resulting list is about 700 sites so far. It's become partly a survey, partly an encyclopedia, partly a tour guide to great places. People use our list to figure out where they want to go. And you can see those. We call it the Census of Places That Matter, and you can see it on www.placematters.net. But this is not entirely a web project. This is partly a web project and partly on the ground. So for our 10th anniversary, we consulted our Place Matters census to see what kinds of cultural work these places were actually doing. So here's what we found. Places that matter: keep the city beautiful, host gatherings, enhance community life, mark and preserve history, sustain traditions, foster creativity, preserve local distinctiveness, bring public space to life, incubate social change, and create destinations. So many of the things that have been talked about throughout these last 2 days. But another quality, which is harder to put your finger on, is that many of these places are just people-friendly. I struggled to find the word to describe this, but people-friendly was the one I could come up with, in that they give the users some measure of independence, some measure of choice, a moment to make their own history and culture. They're not over-programmed. So I'm going to show a few places from the census that perform these functions. Now, with the possible exception of the first site, these places probably would be overlooked in surveys that were done for environmental impact studies or other official surveys. So they tend to stay under the radar and unrecognized, even when people are out there looking for special places, which is a shame because they are very much the kinds of places that really do bring vitality, both social and economic vitality, to the city. So La Plaza Cultural, the East Village of Manhattan, it's one of the oldest of the city's community gardens. So it brings beauty to the Lower East Side, but it also offers people a place to gather. It enhances community life, it preserves local distinctiveness, and so like many of the best spaces, it actually performs a number of functions, brings a number of benefits, not just perhaps the first one you might think of as beauty. Many special places also support multiple uses. Gaelic Park, which was founded in 1928, hosts Irish football and hurling, but it also hosts a great deal more. A friend of the park said that it creates a space where things happen. It's a pub and a field, but also a theater and an arena. It can become all of these things depending on the need and the occasion. Other places do one thing extremely well. Mandolin Brothers is a world-class emporium for fretted instruments, and it draws people to Staten Island from throughout the region and literally throughout the world. And as an example of that kind of people-friendly site that I was talking about, or that people-friendly character, Mandolin Brothers is known for being particularly welcoming. So anybody can come in, take down their most expensive guitar off the wall and play it. So it's more than just a site for consumption. It's also a place where people are becoming creative. Now, one quality that works against the recognition of many of these special places is that they're just not obvious to all of us. Many are visible mainly to insiders. And in part, that's actually what makes them special to a certain extent. So here's how our nominator described a stretch of Steinway Street that hosts Middle Eastern establishments. She said there's a certain kind of feeling that you get from a city that you love. It's intangible and vague and not easily described. It's when all your senses get inspired at once. This happens to me on Steinway Street in Queens, she said. It's hard to say exactly what transports me back to Cairo when I'm there. Maybe the smell at lunchtime, or the tinny beat of Arab pop out of car stereos, or the slow waves of people walking to the mosque on Friday afternoons. Steinway Street is where I connect to that indescribable feeling I get when I'm over on the other side of the world. But she feels these beautiful things in a very pedestrian-looking little coffee shop, so it's not the place that you would recognize as you walk down the street. Local residents also express a sense of ownership for this 80-foot limestone frieze. It was created in the 1930s by the artist Richmond Barthet, and it's located in the Kingsborough houses. So the faces of all the figures are carved with African features, and the whole piece refers to the biblical Exodus. For our nominator, who grew up in the largely African-American Kingsborough houses, that was one of the first actually integrated public housing in the city, the wall symbolized both bondage and the struggle for liberation. And in an era when public images of Black beauty were rare, it resonated with a special meaning. So behind many of the places in our census are the dedicated people sustaining them. It's a tribute to the energy and passion of so many New Yorkers that many special places are actually maintained against great odds. This group, the Cooper Square Committee, began in 1959 to save buildings along 2nd Avenue in Manhattan from bulldozing in an urban renewal plan. One of the results of their effort is that the publicly supported cultural district known as the Fourth Arts Block has actually been able to evolve in the space that they helped to save. It's part of a vibrant block of theaters, community organizations, and affordable homes and businesses. Together, they constitute a revitalized area that offers actually a very unusual vision, because it's a revitalization that's been achieved without the displacement of low-income residents. Rather an amazing record. And what's also true about Fourth Arts Block is that it's a result of significant private and public effort, beginning in 1959 with grassroots organizing, but involving many city agencies and many kinds of public activities over the years. Now that's the case actually with many places that are listed on the Census of Places That Matter, this combination of private and public. So it suggests that both kinds of attention and effort are needed to sustain places that contribute to vital communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Marcy. I think, Marcy, you really summed up what many of us on the panel have been talking about in cataloging not only vibrant neighborhoods, but the tools in the toolkit and the metrics for measuring vibrancy. I've been asked to announce that Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer is here, and of course, he has done more in the past 4+ years to support vibrant neighborhoods than anyone else. So, Vin, shall I introduce him? Is he next?
We have a concession that's going to come out.
Oh, great.
Are we moving or do we have? We're ready. Okay, do you want to go for a couple questions?
This one? No, I think
we got to go. Hey,
No.
we're going to move it along, everybody. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.